The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 37. The Eagle. If the gold settee I had been sleeping on intermittently since I was 15 had a voice, it would have said something like, "No, baby, I'm done. Put me out to pasture. I can no longer take the strain." We both hurt, the gold settee and I. My lower back ached and the settee's springs sagged. I expected we were both looking forward to me sleeping in an actual bed. Since my illness, Shirley and I had become closer, and my dad was happy about that. My dad and I had always been close, and we had always been happy about that. Except for some really bizarre dreams, my stay with my dad had been uneventful and relaxing, and he had done a good, albeit clumsy job of nurturing me back to health. I appreciated him for that, and I appreciated Shirley, but I was looking forward to some solitude, although I didn't mention that when I hugged them both goodbye on the front doorsteps. "Take care of my girl," said my dad through the window to the taxi driver. "I will, mate, don't worry, she's in good hands," said the taxi driver as he mock saluted my dad. The taxi driver told me he knew all the backaways around Brighton, the city he had been born in. "I have saved a lot of people a lot of money over the years, love," he said proudly. I thanked him for that as I looked out of the front window, but the view was obscured by a load of Brighton and Hove Albion Soccer Club memorabilia spread across the dashboard. The driver told me his passion was for soccer, a good curry, and his ex-wife. Apparently she had run off with a man half her age, but he was certain that one day she would come back. It was so weird, but as we pulled up to my flat, I knew she wouldn't. "Thank you very much, love. You take care now." "I will, and you too," I said as I put my wallet back in my handbag. I entered the flat I had not seen for weeks. I walked into the living room and sat down on a chair next to the huge bay window, which was open. The smell of roses that the neighbour had planted in her front flower bed floated in, and I felt a lightness of heart that had surprised me. My brother was out. He and I hadn't seen that much of each other. I had been ill and he had been working hard. Before I had left to convalesce at my dad's, we'd had a really nasty argument over something unimportant. I thought in part it was because we reminded each other of our uncomfortable past, and our minds were now conditioned to accept that being uncomfortable was normal. But I felt we could get over that if we tried, and the thought made me happy. I liked feeling optimistic, and the sensation lasted several slow minutes, until I felt internally sunlit. But then the moment was shattered, as usual, by a voice in my head that was loud and demanding, and all was dark again. What the fuck do you have to be optimistic about? I shut my eyes and shook my head. Why can I never hold on to a good mood, I asked myself. The response wasn't loud, but small and still and nurturing, as if it was trying to assist me in some way. You will be able to hold on to a good mood with a little practice. Fear not." I hoped there wouldn't be a third voice to confuse me further. My brother was out riding his bike, which he kept in the hallway. He worked long hours and had recently joined the local cycling club. The bike he had spent months saving for had 15 gears, and he polished the chrome incessantly. He was physically fit, never having taken up smoking or drinking. It seemed sustaining a cleaner lifestyle than those who raised him was how he rebelled. By nature my brother was curious, and he was well aware that there was much to know about the history of mankind that his school teachers had not shared, or perhaps the contents of his mind had not permitted him to focus. My brother's interest in the humanities began when he was 18, especially history, and the thought of being cultured now drove him. He became a walking encyclopedia on a lot of subjects very quickly because his memory was very sharp. If you wanted to know about the Italian Renaissance, he could tell you all about it. He could tell you all about the Incas and the Aztecs, the Norman Conquest and the French Revolution. But he never seemed to gravitate towards philosophy. The world for him was a freak show that he didn't trust, and all he felt he could do was suck it up and attempt to remain upright, like every other soul throughout history who had also found themselves standing on a constantly shifting deck. As the sun went down, so did I. While brushing my teeth, I made a mental list of all the things I had to do in the morning: the laundrette, the supermarket. But first on the list, I would have to find a job. The rent was due. Because I was still only 17, I wouldn't be able to apply to any of the airlines for over a year, a plan that had been growing in my mind since the Laker ladies who had moved in next door to us when I was 10. The thought of having to do more menial work until then was deflating, but I had long since lived with the sensation that I was biding time for some future moment where I could escape the tick-tock. The feeling had been with me for a very long time. The promise of such a future moment would keep me going. I climbed into bed and opened the atlas my dad had given me during my convalescence. "Take care of this," he had said. "It belonged to your grandfather." I had never met my grandfather, but I could still smell him on the pages, which I turned very carefully out of respect. I was propped up on 2 soft pillows, and my back said "thank you" over and over again. I leafed through the book, spellbound that the world was so large and so sprawling, and there was so much water on it. I wondered whether my grandfather had been equally as fascinated. As I turned the pages, my focus was precise. I soon knew where the Bay of Bengal was in relation to the tiny little island in the middle of the North Sea that I was stuck on. I knew where the Dolomites were in relation to the smoke-filled flat my dad and Shirley lived in. I knew where the diamond mines of South Africa were in relation to the Khyber Pass. Would I ever walk on it? I asked myself. "Yes, of course you will," said the still small voice that spoke from within. I recognised the eminence of this voice. It liked to reassure and affirm, unlike the other voice in my head which did the exact opposite. I closed the atlas and put it on the floor. I then curled up in a ball, glad not to be enduring squeaky springs and heavy seat-front traffic. Tomorrow morning I'd visit the job centre in search of something to tide me over for a while, and if I managed to score an interview, I would buy an ice cream to celebrate. I slept very well that night, but when I woke up I wasn't sure I'd slept at all. I was somehow exhausted but energised. I brewed some tea and turned on the radio before stepping into the drizzle of water the landlord had passed off as a shower. I soaked myself with a bar of zest while Queen's "I Want to Break Free" played from the small radio on the windowsill. It was then that last night's dream shot into my awareness. I took in a deep breath. My dreams of late had felt so real, but this one was the only one that remained in my mind with such particular clarity. I was me, but I had the body of a raptor, perhaps an eagle. My mind was mine, my thoughts were mine, my memories too. My wings spanned 12 feet and my pectoral muscles bulged through my feathers, which were deep purplish blue. I could reach great altitudes in no time at all. I flew to the moon and dove back to Earth again at astonishing speeds. My visual acuity was dramatic. I seemed to have a built-in magnifying lens, which meant I could see a rabbit on the ground from 10 miles high. I had no instinct to consume it. In fact, I wanted to protect it and keep it safe from birds like me. The array of tint and hue that coloured all of nature was shocking to me. The rabbit's fur was composed of 30 different shades of brown. I flew on the thermals and covered vast distances, gliding for hours, swooping and achieving speeds that no fighter jet could have managed. I flew over cities and deserts and oceans. I flew to Africa and around to India and then on to Australia and then around again via Hawaii and then across the Americas and then over the Atlantic for Europe. My last stop was Jerusalem. I swooped close to the ground through the mountain ranges and down into the valleys, then through the wooded Judean hills. But this particular place was uncomfortably familiar, and I accelerated away on a microburst of air that had appeared from nowhere. This was where the dream had ended. I brought my attention back to the present moment and grabbed a towel, a threadbare counterfeit that I would have replaced with something fluffier if I'd have had the money. I dried myself and then began blow-drying my hair, wishing I had feathers instead. As I began to dress, the phone rang. It was my dad, and he sounded jubilant. He told me that a 2-bedroom flat in the same building he was living in had unexpectedly become available that morning. For a little more rent each month, my brother and I could have it. My dad was pleased because the lease we had on our current flat was in his name, and I was pleased because my brother and I had been fighting so much and so loudly, it was likely the eviction process was underway anyway. My dad proceeded to describe the layout of the flat. This time my brother had his own bedroom. The flat was at the back of the building, and so we wouldn't have an ocean view, but I wouldn't be able to hear the seafront traffic either. I was thrilled at the prospect of living on Hove's prestigious seafront. I had passed Brunswick Terrace many times and always loved the Regency architecture and the manicured lawns of the seafront's promenade. I hung up the phone smiling and sat on the edge of my bed to contemplate this new turn of events. My dad had told me to ask my mum for help with a deposit, which he knew she would cough up, and so did I. For now I needed to focus on finding a job. At first I was positive I would, until a familiar voice in my head assured me that finding a job alongside the other 3 million unemployed would not be easy. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. And as I left my flat to head to the job centre, my thoughts got worse. The reality is, Sarah, that you'll soon be heading down boring North Street at a boring 4 miles an hour on 2 boring legs in a boring outfit that looks like it belongs to someone who does menial work with a boring mission to find a boring job to fund your boring life. I was very despondent, and then it began to rain. Christ, I wished I was an eagle. The job centre was full of drearily clad people also searching for employment. The job market in 1984 had depressed an entire nation, but Margaret Thatcher was supposedly working on it. I looked around and again wondered whether I would find employment given all the competition, but I also surmised that everyone else likely felt the same. A lot of us there that day had left school with nothing to show for it. We didn't expect much. I had no work experience other than changing kids' nappies and wiping their noses, and I had done this again for the elderly and the dependent. But the thought of working in another one of Brighton's insalubrious homes of no rest made the thought of diving off the job centre roof more appealing. Those looking for employment were there because life on earth meant, for most of us, getting up, working, going to sleep and doing it all over again. I walked among tired-looking men without a choice, and I walked amongst housewives who wanted some pin money because the money their husband earns was already accounted for. There were also a lot of teenagers like me, unenthusiastic in their demeanour because the government threatened to deny them their dole money if they didn't attempt to become a member of the workforce. Who wanted to become a member of the workforce, and moreover, who had the staying power to even pretend they did? The reality for most of us there that day was that our bodies needed feeding in order to function, and the gas company needed our money because we needed their gas to warm our can of beans. Those who could afford roast chicken and mashed potatoes for dinner wore white collars, not blue. Margaret Thatcher didn't even need to wear a collar. She got roast chicken whenever she wanted it. I entered then exited various cubicle-like areas that advertised jobs in categories like electricians, cashiers, welders, typists, etc. I then walked into an area that said general office work. I picked up an index card offering a job in the data processing department of a local publishing house with the bracketed words, "No experience required." I had no idea what data processing entailed, but I shrugged and took the index card over to the lady responsible for arranging interviews. She smiled a big unhappy smile, probably due to the fact that she would rather have been lying on a beach in the Italian Riviera too. She told me to sit down and I waited while she called the number on the card. After speaking for a few seconds, she covered the receiver with her hand and asked me whether I was free to attend an interview that day. I said yes, and she ticked a box. She was good at her job, flushing us through with grace. I bought an ice cream on the way to my interview and arrived at Harvester Press at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The listed building, converted into offices, was situated in the heart of the Lanes, a trendy and interesting historic part of Brighton that was only about a half-mile walk from my flat. The lady interviewing me, Valerie, didn't try to pretend to be a welcoming, friendly type. I liked her for her honesty. Valerie did not want to waste any time on small fry. Good, I thought, nor did I. She virtually offered me the job on the spot and asked whether I could start the following day before shoving me out the door. I said yes, I would be happy to. Harvester Press was a thriving place of about 40 employees. I was employed to do manual labour, not to edit books or write publicity or court potential authors. The glamorous jobs were for the graduates. I occasionally felt inadequate in the company of those who had been university educated, but I wasn't jealous. And after a week of noticing all I needed to know about 9-to-5 office life, I realised there was a sad truth to the lives of my co-workers that almost made me gleeful. They might have the job title editor or trade manager or publicity director, but they would be stuck in an office with fluorescence lights that hummed and copy machines that jammed for the foreseeable future. They would show up at 9 and leave at 5 and do so the following week and the week after that. Their boss would likely want a lawful but arbitrary pound of flesh, and they would have to oblige because of the surplus graduates desperate for careers in the publishing industry. My future would be totally different. I would be in Rio one week looking up at the statue of Christ and wandering Hell's Kitchen, the biggest apple the world has ever seen, next. I had already seen it in my mind's eye. While I worked at the press, I still had bird dreams, but I was not the bird flying about the earth. Now the bird in my dreams was the same beautiful creature I had been, but separate from me, and once it appeared 3 nights in a row. The bird was never flying in these dreams. He just sat perched on my grandfather's atlas and sang these words. She's a restless spirit on an endless flight. I'd heard these words before playing. They were on the jukebox in the Muse Bar. Sometimes I wondered whether it was an omen. I liked the idea of being on an endless flight. It took me a while to remember the name of the song, and when I did, I went to the record shop in the lanes and asked the owner to play the Eagles' debut album, specifically the second track, Witchy Woman. The record shop owner and I had struck up a friendship during the time I had been in Brighton, and he was always glad when someone came in to share a song or two with him. He and I both smoked, and his shop was grungy and delightful, and he was never upset if I didn't buy anything. After I left the record shop, I suddenly remembered the strange lady who had visited me late one night when I was 5 years old. I'd never forgotten her, and I thought now she looked exactly like that, like a witchy woman. I enjoyed working at Harvester Press, but my salary was a joke, but then so was my performance. My job was to key in as many book orders as I could in an 8-hour day. Harvester Press had just purchased a cutting-edge computer system. I had never seen a computer before and had never touched a keyboard. When my supervisor told me what my duties were, I thought I would pick things up easily enough, and besides, how hard could entering a name, a shipping address and pressing enter be? It wasn't hard, but I messed it up all the time. My supervisor had to constantly check my work to make sure I had keyed in the right book title and the right address, but she liked having me around and never complained because I made her laugh. My supervisor never opened up about her life, but I got the feeling she was biding time for some future moment too. I suspected she wanted a chubby baby she could dress like a doll. She and I listened to Radio 1 together while we were working and took nice long lunch breaks. She thought I was funny and quirky, and I thought she was brilliantly aloof, but somehow sad, as if she had missed the entire point behind her existence and knew it. I was well liked, not only by my supervisor, but by my other co-workers and management who relied on Harvester's unskilled employees for light relief. I was the ringleader of the frequent gatherings at the local pub. The data processing department received stacks of orders daily, but Libby, my supervisor, and I couldn't keep up with the processing. We didn't even come close. The solution would have been easy to implement if Valerie, the lady who had hired me, had been paying attention. Valerie should have fired me, and instead hired at least 3 women able to type 100 words a minute, and she should have doubled their salaries, offering a monthly bonus for exceeding an established quota. I even thought about telling Valerie that there was a better way because the situation was so lame. But I needed the job and she needed to get through her day without irritants impeding its flow. So I kept my mouth shut, and so did Libby, but the inefficiency of it made us both cringe. The publisher and chairman of the company was a wealthy and eccentric and animated man who paid more attention to me than the other girls, but he was always respectful and never stepped over the mark. I was still a virgin and not interested in sex. In fact, I disappointed a lot of men who hoped I might be. John, the publisher, was 25 years older than me, and I had a crush on him too. It was harmless, flattering fun, that's all, a confidence boost for us both. At the annual Christmas party, I was chosen to sit at the head table with him and his other favourites, while the employees he disliked, the graduates, sat at the tables near the toilets. I thought this was very funny. My life remained constant during the year 1985, and I coasted for the remainder of it. A picture of a Venezuelan waterfall on a calendar pinned to the wall next to my desk. I paid my bills and kept my nose clean. The following year, I would be able to apply to one of the charter airlines. Since I had been a little girl, images of the Laker ladies who bathed topless in the garden next to ours had never been far away. I too would board a brightly painted jet in a tight-fitting uniform. I too was ready for my endless flight.